Peace, peace, peace. Today we're going to go on the Wall Street walk. We started last year with our Seneca Village Central Park walk. That was in the daytime. Now we're going on a PM history lesson. Here we go. Did you know there is a national African burial ground in New York City? There are over 15,000. That's 15,000 buried enslaved, and those who are not enslaved laid to rest at this location. Let's go. To get down here, you can take the 456 or the J or the Z to Brooklyn Bridge, or you could take the 2 or the 3 to Chambers Street. There's so much history down here in Lower Manhattan. We're gonna make a couple of stops today. Our first stop, when I think about Wall Street, the first thing that comes to mind is Black Wall Street. So that's gonna be our first stop, Black Wall Street. Next, we're gonna travel. We're gonna make another stop. Our second destination is gonna be Wall Street. You're probably really familiar, the Wolf of Wall Street, the Stock Exchange, NASDAQ. They got that bull down there. They had the statue of the little girl with her hands on her hip leaning in. Y'all know about Wall Street. Then our final stop is going to be the African Burial Ground, the national monument that's located down here, where over 15,000 Africans are buried. Black Wall Street has a special place in American history as a platform that paved the way for black communities and businesses to thrive. Not too long ago, black men and women were not allowed to own property. We faced violence and freedom restrictions, such as being stripped of the right to vote, and endured other forms of racial segregation and race-based legislation. Despite this, a sense of community and faith bloomed among black neighborhoods, where isolation and segregation was the norm. Black people gave each other a place for community, safety, and economic support. 100 years later, black communities were thriving and economic strength was established. A perfect example of this progress was Black Wall Street, located in Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Black Wall Street was a thriving community in Greenwood in the 1900s. This was a community that had bustling black-owned businesses, theaters, schools, social health, and a strong distribution of wealth among its middle and upper classes. Reports estimate the community had more than 10,000 African American residents, most of them thriving. Black Wall Street was the epitome of self-sustaining community and strength. Black people supported each other, which allowed for easier access to resources, saving, housing, jobs, education, and health. Black Wall Street was just one of many thriving communities in the United States, but it also became a site that would serve as an example of violence and hatred that grew out of greed from white financial interests. An accusation of sexual assault was the match that ignited and smoldered hatred and resentment of the thriving Black Wall Street community. The accusation inspired the lynch mob, which included nearly 2,000 Ku Klux Klan members who wanted to get justice. Everything came crashing down on Wall Street on May 31st, 1921. In just 16 hours, police arrested 60% of the black residents living in Black Wall Street. Mobs burned down black-owned businesses and homes and murdered hundreds of citizens. When black men joined forces to protect their homes, they were driven out and feared for their lives. By today's estimates, the dreadful and murderous 16 hours caused more than $30 million in damages. The residents of Greenwood were blamed for the death and destruction, and the government made it nearly impossible to rebuild. But we can rebuild the Black Wall Street now by working together. Wall Street is an important part of New York City. The ironic part is it only runs for 6 blocks. It's at the southern tip of Manhattan. The New York Stock Exchange is located there. The Federal Reserve is the most important financial organization in the United States. The Wall Street Journal, the NASDAQ, The New York Mercantile Exchange and countless banks all operate nearby. When Manhattan was owned by the Dutch, they grew concerned that England would invade their small colony. To repel attackers, the Dutch built a wall, 12 feet high and over 2,000 feet long around their settlement. It ran approximately along the area we know as Wall Street today, with gates approximately at the modern intersections of Wall Street and Pearl and Wall Street and Broadway. Wall Street's history as a financial center began with slavery. The Dutch settlers of New Amsterdam conducted much of their trading outside, building a large outdoor market for even financial transactions. This carried over after the English took over the land and turned it into New York. In 1711, New York named Wall Street the location of the city's slave market. Given the significant role that slavery played in the economics of the 13 colonies, this quickly established the financial center of gravity in the young city. Men made fortunes trading slaves on the auction blocks of Wall Street, a practice that would not end for over 100 years. Believe it or not, before I even knew this information, it was just something eerily weird and wicked feeling about South Street Seaport. I never liked these boat rides. Don't invite me on no boat ride. I'm not going. Bright lights, the big city. They call it New York. Welcome to New York City. I heard the man. This is it. Land of skyscrapers. Manholes. Where this monument at? Peace. Yo, you know what the African monument is? That's this way. Oh, thank you, brother. So we here, people. This is it. It's right here. Place of remembrance. From 1690 until 1794, an estimated 15,000 enslaved and free Africans were laid to rest in the African burial ground. In 1991, during construction of the Ted Weiss Federal Building, 419 human skeletal remains were exhumed. The rediscovery of the cemetery sparked vigorous efforts to preserve this hallowed ground. In 1993, a small portion of the original 6.6 acre cemetery became the first below ground New York City landmark and a National Historic Landmark. African Burial Ground National Monument was proclaimed on February 27th. All right, anniversary coming up. February 27th, 2006. Widely regarded as America's most significant archaeological find of the 20th century. It's also a place of remembrance and reflection. So this is what it looks like. The circle right here, the circle of the diaspora. The African diaspora is the forced removal of Africans from their homeland to different parts of the world. It is also Africans' unwavering spirit and ability to adapt. This circular wall ramp in interior court displays cultural and spiritual images from Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and other areas throughout the diaspora. Ancestral Chamber. That's that piece right there. The 24-foot high Ancestral Chamber represents the soaring African spirit. Wall of Remembrance. As one happens by the north wall, facing Duane Street, you are immediately struck by the scale and detail of a highly polished wall of granite, inscribed with a libation text carved into it, the Wall of Remembrance. It is intended to draw people in and thus begin the process of enlightenment and education. Whoa, you definitely feel the presence of our people. Wow. Go down these stairs carefully. Now we're in the interior. This is beautiful. This first one says, Crossroads. What's that say? Guardian of the Crossroads. Supremacy of God. Signature of the Spirit. Guardianship. Divinity of Mother Earth. Perishability and endurance. And perishability. Unable to perish. The Ankh right here. You should know what that is. I ain't gonna tell you what that means. What is that a symbol of? Life. Alright? Egyptian symbol of life. We got the medicine wheel here. Native American circle of life. Know about that from some of these trainings. Here at Good Shepherd. We got the Latin cross for Christian faith. We're gonna keep moving along. You know about that? What you know about that? That crescent moon and the star. Islamic faith. Getting a little dark over here. Can't see. Can't see. Female cemetery. Continuity of human life.
Listen, you can't be here.
Oh no?
It's closed.
All right.
You gotta come when it's open.
Okay.
All right?
Just shooting a video. Okay.
Yeah, but
All right. All right, we're gonna get the others off the internet.
You think they got a high
coming around fast.
guard here to guard this.
This is the whole thing right here, right?
Huh?
This is it?
Well, they got a museum too. It's
right.
open tomorrow Saturday? Yeah, it's open
Tomorrow Saturday.
You
I saw it for the weather, yeah.
This was closed, yeah. Usually it should have been open today because of the weather. They closed this down. They don't want nobody.
And that's supposed to be where they rebury the people?
Yeah, that's where they rebury.
So thank you.
The museum is open from 10 to 4.
All right, thanks. In the distance below ground from which the ancestral remains were exhumed. It is made of the Verdi Fontaine green granite from Africa. The heart-like Sankofa symbol from West Africa means learn from the past to prepare for the future. The interior recalls a ship's hold and provides a place for individual contemplation and prayer. And then you have this part, the ancestral re-internment ground. On October 2003, the exhumed ancestral remains were reburied on this site. It's amazing. The bones and accompanying artifacts were placed in handcrafted wooden coffins made in Ghana and lined with kente cloth. The coffins were placed in 7 crypts as close as possible to the original burial position, with heads facing west. 7 burial mounds mark the location of the re-interments. If you wish, you may place flowers on top of the burial mounds. Okay? This is right in the heart of the city. The Federal Building, the African Monument. We need to get in here though. Definitely feel a spirit here. These mounds you see, that's where they have people buried in there. So that's why it's hard to stop the spirit of our people. They had us buried here underground for over 100 years, but we still found a way, as we always find a way, to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. For all those who were lost, for all those who were stolen, for all those who were left behind, for all those who were not forgotten. The British captured New Amsterdam and renamed it New York. Y'all knew that? The British captured New Amsterdam and renamed it New York. Before the American Revolution, New York had more enslaved Africans, its most valuable commodity, than any other colony in the North. There were also free Africans, some descended from those freed by the Dutch West Indian Company. Men cleared farmland, filled swamps, and built structures and roads like Broadway and the Wall. Today's Wall Street. Women sold, cooked, harvested, and cared for owners' children as well as their own. From an early age, children carried water and firewood. The work was hard, and death rates for Africans were disproportionately high. What year we talking about? We talking about 1797. Let's read this last sentence again. The work was hard and death rates for Africans were disproportionately high. So fast forward from 1797 to 2022, the work is still hard and death rates are still disproportionately high. It's terrible, man. For a century, from the 1690s to the 1790s, a small plot of land in lower Manhattan became the final resting place for over 15,000 free and enslaved Africans. The burial ground was then lost under years of urban development and landfill, until workers rediscovered the burial ground in 1991 during the excavation of the land for a federal government office building. I know they must have been wilding like, yo, is this a bone? Is this a skull? Excavations at the site revealed the remains of 419 Africans and over 500 individual artifacts. Considered one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century, the African burial ground is of national significance because of what it can tell us about the lives of Africans and African Americans in an urban context. Both the deceased and their possessions help piece together a more complete history of New York City in the 17th and 18th centuries and what life was like for Africans in the city. The discoveries demonstrate the power of collaboration between anthropology, archaeology, and history. In 1640, the Dutch granted conditional freedom to a group of African men and women. This action would serve as the impetus for the creation of an African community in New York. Settling themselves outside of the town, roughly a mile from the tip of Manhattan, the African community developed a distinct culture. In 1697, Africans were not allowed to bury their dead in what had become New York's primary burial ground. Scholars believe that this ban was the reason Africans use the burial ground today, recognized as the African Burial Ground National Monument. Forced to establish their own burial ground, Africans created their sacred space in what was at the time
Despite a
the
1731
Commons, area
law
away from the bustle of the
limiting the
city.
number of enslaved
Today, the
Africans
burial
who could
ground
descend
is in
for a funeral
downtown
to no more
Manhattan.
than 12, Africans and their descendants continued to venerate loved ones. Their burial ground was outside the city wall or palisade, Chamber Street today, built by enslaved Africans in 1746. Activists held a rally and a vigil in 1992 to honor those laid to rest at the African burial ground. The rediscovery of the burial ground revealed that Africans and descendants buried loved ones with dignity and respect. Of course we would. Of course they did. In the 17th and 18th century, more than 90% of the 419 skeletal remains were wrapped in cloth, and most of the bodies were buried in full-sized coffins. Africans continued other traditional practices such as placing pennies over the eyes to keep them closed. Small artifacts like beads, cowrie shells, and cufflinks sometimes accompanied the burials. Community activists, politicians, and many others fought vehemently to preserve the burial ground and to honor this history and culture. The monument is at 290 Broadway. It's open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's closed November to March. And this is a national monument. National, that's federal. The Department of Interior. Africans in early New York. Africans were brought to the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam from different regions with diverse cultures, religions, and languages. In 1664,
there's a new effort to expand the African Burial Ground National Monument in Lower Manhattan. A delegation of New York lawmakers reintroduced legislation today to create the African Burial Ground International Memorial Museum and Education Center. The historic site is the final resting place for 15,000 free and enslaved Africans from the 17th and 18th centuries.
The museum would create a new venue where we can grow our understanding of the true history of our nation, our state, and of the institution of slavery in the United States and around the world.
The museum would serve as a sister site of the National African American Museum in Washington, the National Museum of African American History and Culture.